My family disowned me 9 years ago because I married a black woman. For 9 long years, they treated me like I was dead. Not a single phone call. Not a holiday card. Nothing. Then my automated microchip company went public for $11 million. Suddenly, my 91-year-old mother and my estranged son showed up on my front porch at 7 in the morning, holding a legal document that would sign my life away. They gave me a list of demands, but what I did next made them turn pale in absolute shock. If you are listening to this, take a deep breath, because what I am about to tell you is a story of ultimate betrayal driven by greed and a prejudice so deep it took my breath away. Let me know where you are listening from in the comments below, and hit that like button if you believe that blood does not always mean family. My name is Richard. I am 70 years old, and I live in Seattle, Washington. I spent my entire life building things. As a chief engineer, I started my microchip automation company in a damp garage with nothing but a soldering iron and a stubborn refusal to fail. Over the decades, I poured my sweat, my youth, and my health into that company to ensure my family would never have to worry about their future. But somewhere along the line, the wealth I created poisoned the very people I was trying to provide for. 9 years ago, I found the love of my life. Maya is a brilliant retired university professor. She is elegant, kind, and she happens to be a black woman. When I introduced her to my family, the facade of their refined upper-class manners shattered. My mother Beatrice, a woman obsessed with country clubs and social standing, looked at Maya with a disgust that chilled me to the bone. My son Harrison, who had lived off my credit cards his entire adult life, stood right beside his grandmother and told me I was ruining the family legacy. They gave me an ultimatum. It was them or Maya. I chose Maya. I married her in a quiet ceremony by the coast, and from that day forward, my mother and my son vanished from my life. They cut me off entirely. No calls on my birthday. No check-ins when the global pandemic hit. Total, absolute silence. And I made peace with that. Maya and I built a beautiful, quiet life together. Just 3 weeks ago, I had to undergo a minor heart stent procedure. It was a wake-up call about my age, but Maya was by my side every single second, nursing me back to health. I was finally resting, finally enjoying the fruits of my labor after my company's recent $11 million initial public offering. Then came last Sunday. It was exactly 7 in the morning. The Seattle rain was tapping gently against the glass of our front windows. Maya was in the kitchen brewing coffee, and the house smelled like roasted beans and peaceful Sunday mornings. When the doorbell rang, I assumed it was the early grocery delivery we had scheduled. I tightened the belt of my robe, walked down the hallway, and pulled the front door open. I froze. My heart, still recovering from the surgery, gave a painful, heavy thud against my ribs. Standing on my porch was my 91-year-old mother, Beatrice. She was leaning heavily on a silver-handled cane, wearing her signature tweed coat. Beside her stood my 45-year-old son, Harrison. There were no smiles. There were no tears of reunion. There was no asking how my heart surgery went. Before I could even process the shock of seeing them after 3,285 days of silence. Beatrice thrust a thick, leather-bound stack of papers directly into my chest. The heavy thud of the binder against my breastbone actually made me wince. "It is time to clean up your mess, Richard," my mother said. Her voice was just as I remembered it. Cold, authoritative, and dripping with condescension. "Sign this. Harrison and I are taking over the asset management to protect you from being drained by outsiders in your old age." I looked down at the document. The bold letters across the top read Family Protection Trust. I could barely find my voice. "You disappear for a decade," I said, staring at my son who was refusing to meet my eyes directly. "And you show up at the crack of dawn to hand me a legal contract." Harrison puffed out his chest, adjusting the lapels of his suit. "Dad, we saw the news about the IPO. $11 million is a lot of money to manage, especially in your condition. We know about the heart surgery. You are getting older. Your mind is going to start slipping. We are here to protect the family estate before someone takes advantage of you." Before the words could even fully register in my mind, I heard soft footsteps behind me. Maya stepped into the foyer, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She stopped right behind my shoulder. The temperature on the porch seemed to drop 10 degrees. Beatrice slowly shifted her gaze from me to my wife. The look on my mother's face was exactly the same as it had been 9 years ago. It was a look of profound, unapologetic racial disgust. She looked at Maya, a highly educated, brilliant woman, as if she were a thief who had broken into the house. "I see the outsider is still here," Beatrice sneered, not even addressing Maya directly. Maya did not flinch. She simply placed a warm, steady hand on my shoulder. I felt the heat of her touch anchoring me, calming the sudden spike in my blood pressure. "Can we help you?" Maya asked, her voice perfectly even and polite. My mother ignored her completely. Richard, Beatrice snapped, tapping her cane against my hardwood floor. "You are recovering from heart surgery. You are vulnerable. I will not stand by and watch the wealth my husband helped you start be squandered by someone who does not belong in this family. You will sign this trust today, and Harrison will take over the accounts. It is for your own good." I felt a sudden dangerous surge of adrenaline. The absolute audacity was suffocating. I tried to close the door. "I do not have time for this," I said, pushing the heavy oak door forward. "Leave my property. Do not ever come back here." But as the door swung shut, Harrison lunged forward. He wedged his expensive leather shoe into the doorframe. He pushed his weight against the wood, forcing the door back open. I stumbled backward, a sharp ache shooting through my chest where the surgical incisions were still healing. I gasped, grabbing my chest instinctively. Harrison stepped over the threshold, his physical presence looming over me. He was younger, taller, and he knew I was physically weak. "You are not thinking clearly, Dad," Harrison said, his voice dropping into a menacing low register. "The surgery took a toll on you. Your cognitive state is clearly compromised. You are going to sign this paperwork right now, or we are going to have to take legal measures to prove you are unfit to manage your own affairs." He was threatening me. My own son was standing in my foyer, physically intimidating me, threatening to declare me mentally incompetent if I did not hand over my life savings. I looked at Harrison's wrist as he pushed against the door. He was wearing a Patek Philippe watch, a timepiece worth $50,000. But as he strained his arm, his sleeve pulled back. "I have been an engineer my whole life. I know details, I know mechanics." The second hand on his supposed luxury watch was ticking loudly, a dead giveaway of a cheap knockoff, and the cuffs of his tailored shirt were heavily frayed. My mind raced. This was not just a greedy power play. There was a frantic, unhinged desperation in his eyes. "Get out of my house," I rasped, trying to catch my breath. "We are not leaving until you sign." "Dad." Harrison sneered, stepping further into the hallway. "You owe this family. You owe us for abandoning your own blood for her." He pointed a finger aggressively toward Maya. Maya did not scream. She did not panic. With the calm, terrifying authority of a woman who had faced down disrespect her entire life, she reached into her pocket and pulled out her cell phone. She dialed 3 numbers and held her thumb over the call button. "I am pressing the call button in exactly 5 seconds, Maya said, staring dead into Harrison's eyes. "Breaking and entering elder abuse and trespassing. The Seattle police response time to this neighborhood is less than 4 minutes. 5, 4. Harrison hesitated. He looked at Maya's unwavering gaze, then down at my chest where my breathing was heavy and labored. 3, Maya counted, her voice like ice. Harrison gritted his teeth. He slowly pulled his foot back from the doorframe. Beatrice let out a dramatic, offended gasp, clutching her pearls as if she were the victim. "You will regret this, Richard." Beatrice hissed, her voice trembling with fury. "You are out of your mind. We will be back, and we will not be asking next time." Harrison dropped the heavy legal binder onto the small console table by the door. "Read it, old man. You have until Friday, or I promise you I will go to a judge and have you declared legally insane." He grabbed his grandmother's arm, and guided her away from the porch. I slammed the heavy oak door shut and locked the deadbolt. I leaned my back against the wood, sliding down slightly as my legs gave out. Maya was instantly beside me, guiding me to the hallway bench, checking my pulse, murmuring soft words of comfort. I sat there in my own quiet house, looking at the thick legal binder sitting on my table. They had come to take everything: my money, my dignity, and my autonomy. My son had looked me in the eye and threatened to strip away my human rights just to get his hands on my bank accounts. I took a deep breath. The physical pain in my chest was slowly subsiding, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. For 9 years, I had chosen peace. I had chosen to walk away and live quietly. But if they wanted a war, if they wanted to attack my wife and threaten my sanity, they had chosen the wrong man. I am an engineer. I build systems and I know exactly how to dismantle them. They thought I was a weak, sick old man. They thought I would be terrified into compliance. But they had made one fatal miscalculation. They assumed I was going to play defense. I picked up the heavy binder from the table. I looked at Maya, and she saw the shift in my eyes. The shock was gone. The father who still held a shred of hope for his son was dead. I am going to destroy them, I whispered to my wife. I am going to find out exactly why they are so desperate, and I am going to bury them with it. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the heavy, ragged sound of my own breathing. The silence of the house had returned, but the peace was permanently shattered. The thick legal binder sat on the console table like a venomous snake waiting to strike. Maya gently traced the line of my jaw, her eyes reflecting the same quiet resolve that had anchored me for almost a decade. I did not feel fear anymore. I felt an absolute freezing clarity. Before either of us could take another step, my cell phone began to vibrate violently in the pocket of my robe. I pulled it out. The screen flashed a name I had not seen, illuminating a device in 3,285 days. Harrison. I looked at Maya. She gave me a single firm nod. I tapped the screen and put the call on the speaker. "Dad, listen to me," Harrison said. His tone had completely transformed. The menacing, aggressive growl he had used on my front porch was entirely gone. In its place was a smooth, syrupy voice dripping with fabricated warmth and deep concern. It was a performance so polished it made my stomach turn. "I know we started off on the wrong foot just now. Emotions were high. Grandma is just so worried about you, and seeing you standing there looking so frail really shook her." I kept my mouth shut, letting the silence force him to fill the void. "I saw the news about the IPO, Dad." Harrison continued, his voice softening into a calculated plea. $11 million is a massive target on your back. Wall Street is full of absolute vultures. Financial predators look for men exactly your age who have just come into sudden, massive wealth. We just want to protect you. We want to build a fortress around everything you have worked so hard for. I have someone here who wants to talk to you. Please just switch to video." A request for a video call popped up on the screen. I accepted it. The image resolved to show Harrison sitting in the driver's seat of a luxury rental car. Beside him in the passenger seat, holding her own phone, was my daughter Victoria. I had not seen her face since she was 33 years old. She looked older, her features sharpened by time and stress, but she was currently wiping away heavy, dramatic tears. Daddy, Victoria sobbed, pressing her hand against her mouth. "I have missed you so much. It breaks my heart that we have been apart for all these years. We just want to reconcile. We want to be a family again. You just had heart surgery, and you should not be dealing with the stress of corporate wealth and asset management. Please let us take this burden off your shoulders so you can just focus on recovering." It was a masterful theater production. If I had not seen Harrison wedge his foot into my doorframe 20 minutes earlier, if I had not heard him threaten to declare me legally insane, I might have been moved. I might have been that desperate, lonely father who wanted his little girl back. But I was an engineer. I saw the mechanics behind the machine. Then from the back seat of the car, Beatrice leaned into the frame. Her face was twisted into an expression of profound suffering. "Richard," my mother said, her voice shaking with practiced frailty. "I am 91 years old. My doctors have told me I only have a few months left to live. My dying wish is to see this family united and to know that the legacy your father helped build is secured. Do not deny a dying woman her final piece." I looked at the screen, analyzing the absolute lack of sincerity in their eyes. They were weaving a plausible lie, wrapping a hostile corporate takeover in the warm, comforting blanket of familial love. And then, true to form, they could not resist showing their real colors. "Maya is a wonderful woman, I am sure," Harrison said, forcing a tight, patronizing smile. "But she is an academic dad. She is a retired university professor. She does not understand venture capital. She does not understand corporate tax structures or high-level asset protection. She is going to drown in the legalities of an $11 million windfall. Let us handle the aggressive financial side so you and Maya can just relax and enjoy your golden years." The sheer disrespect masked as concern was breathtaking. Maya held a doctorate in economics. She understood corporate structures better than anyone I had ever met. But to them, she was just an uneducated outsider who had stolen their prize. They were framing their aggressive theft as an act of mercy. I knew I had to play the game. If I rejected them outright, if I hung up the phone and told them to go to hell, they would immediately accelerate their plans. They would march straight to a corrupt judge and file for emergency guardianship. I needed to buy time. I needed to disarm them with compliance. "You are giving me a lot to process," I said, making my voice sound weaker and more breathless than it actually was. "I am tired, Harrison. My chest hurts. I need to read through the document." "Of course," Dad Harrison replied instantly, his voice leaping with suppressed excitement. "Take your time. Read every page. We are just trying to set up a local Seattle family trust to keep everything simple and protected from state taxes. We can transfer the primary assets into the Delaware holding account by the end of the week, and you will never have to worry about a single financial decision again." I felt a sharp, cold spike of adrenaline hit my bloodstream. I did not react verbally, but my eyes widened. A local Seattle family trust. That was what he had claimed on the porch, but his tongue had just slipped. He had just mentioned a Delaware holding account. You do not use a Delaware holding account for a local family trust. You use a Delaware holding account to completely obscure ownership shield assets from immediate legal discovery and rapidly liquidate funds without state-level oversight. He was not trying to manage my money. He was planning to instantly funnel it out of my reach and make it disappear into a corporate black hole. "I will review it," I said, maintaining my frail, exhausted persona. "I will look at it today. I need to rest now." "Take a nap, Daddy," Victoria cooed, blowing a kiss at the camera. "We love you so much. We will talk tomorrow." The screen went black. The call ended. I slowly lowered the phone. The house was silent again, save for the steady rhythm of the rain against the glass. I turned to Maya. Her posture was completely rigid, her sharp mind already dissecting every word of the conversation we had just witnessed. "They are desperate," Maya said quietly, her voice devoid of panic, but laced with deep suspicion. I nodded. "Did you smell my mother's coat when she was standing in the foyer?" "Stale smoke," Maya replied immediately. "Cheap, stale cigarette smoke. Beatrice would never allow herself to smell like a cheap motel. She was always obsessed with high-end perfumes and immaculate appearances. She looked disheveled. And Harrison's shirt collar was frayed. "They are not here as wealthy saviors," I said, reaching out to pick up the heavy legal binder from the table. "They are bankrupt. I can feel it in my bones. But the level of urgency is terrifying. They do not just want to get back into my will. They need to seize control of the cash right this second." I carried the heavy binder into my study, walking past the large drafting tables where I had designed the very microchips that had made me a millionaire. I sat down at my desk and turned on the bright, high-lumen drafting lamp. Maya brought me a fresh cup of coffee and stood behind my chair, resting her hands on my shoulders as I opened the cover. I skipped the standard introductory pages. I knew how these documents worked. The real poison was always buried deep in the labyrinth of legal jargon, hiding in plain sight. I turned to page 47. I pulled my reading glasses down the bridge of my nose and grabbed my magnifying glass. There it was. Clause 8, Section B. Immediate and irrevocable transfer of full medical and financial power of attorney to Harrison Vales upon any formal diagnosis of cognitive decline signed by a licensed medical professional. This was not an asset management agreement. It was a legal death warrant. If I signed this document, I was handing Harrison a loaded gun. All he would need was a single corrupt doctor to declare me confused or suffering from early-onset dementia, and he would instantly gain absolute dictatorial control over my health, my freedom, and my bank accounts. They were not planning to wait for me to die. They were planning to erase my legal existence while I was still breathing. The betrayal cut so deep it felt physical, a cold knife scraping against the walls of my chest. But the sadness was rapidly burning away, replaced by a ferocious, brilliant rage. I had exactly 4 days until Friday. 4 days to uncover the rot hiding beneath their desperate facade. I picked up my phone and dialed the number of the most ruthless corporate attorney I knew. The war had officially begun. They wanted me to believe that handing them my life savings was the only way to save my wife from an imaginary corporate disaster. Maya stood silently behind me, absorbing every single vile, patronizing word they spoke. I could feel the tension in the room, a thick electric charge of suppressed outrage. I wanted to scream. I wanted to reach through the screen, grab my son by his expensive collar, and throw him out of my life permanently. I wanted to defend the honor of the woman who had stood by me when they had abandoned me entirely. But I knew I could not break my character right now in this moment. I had to swallow my pride and choke down the burning bile of my anger. If I defended Maya's financial acumen, I would signal that we were prepared to fight. I would show my hand, and they would immediately deploy their absolute legal nuclear options. So I did the hardest thing I have ever had to do. I let out a ragged sigh, rubbing my temples to simulate total exhaustion. "You might be right, Harrison," I mumbled weakly. "I just want peace. I just want to rest." Relief washed over Harrison's face. His rigid posture melted into a sickening display of triumph. He genuinely believed he had broken me. Victoria let out a theatrical sigh on the phone, pressing her hands together. "Oh, Daddy, that is all we want for you," she cooed. "We just want you to rest and let us take care of the heavy lifting. You have worked so hard for this family. It is our turn to work for you." Beatrice leaned back, a smug smile forming on her face. She had played her final card and thought it secured her victory. I kept my gaze fixed on the floor, allowing my shoulders to slump forward, maintaining the illusion of a defeated, exhausted old man. Harrison tapped the heavy binder sitting on my console table. "I am going to leave this right here for you, Dad," he said. "Take the afternoon to look it over. I have highlighted where the signatures need to go. It is all standard boilerplate language for a local Seattle family trust. Nothing complicated. Just simple asset protection to keep the state taxes off your back and to ensure your medical directives are safely in the hands of your blood relatives." I nodded slowly, forcing my breathing to sound labored. Maya stood perfectly still beside me. She knew exactly what I was doing. After 9 years of peaceful marriage, we did not need to exchange a single glance to communicate. She recognized the tactical retreat. If I kicked them out by force, Harrison would escalate his legal threats. He would march to an emergency judge, claim I was having a medical episode, and file for temporary guardianship before sundown. We had to give them a false sense of security. We had to make them feel comfortable, arrogant, and secure in their impending success. I looked up at the phone screen one last time. "I will read it over, Victoria," I said softly. "I will read it carefully. I just need to lie down for a while. The medication is making me terribly dizzy today." Victoria smiled, her eyes gleaming with a predatory light. "Rest well, Daddy. We will talk very soon, I promise." The video call abruptly disconnected. Harrison slipped his phone into his jacket pocket, and took a deliberate step backward, removing his physical presence from my threshold. He looked down at me, cataloging every sign of weakness to use against me later. I made sure he saw exactly what he wanted to see. I let my hands tremble slightly as I rubbed my chest, wincing, as if the surgical incisions were causing me distress. Harrison smiled. It was a cold, reptilian expression. "I will come by tomorrow afternoon to pick up the paperwork," he said smoothly. "Take your time reviewing the clauses. As I said, it is just a basic local family trust. We just want to get the foundation poured." I nodded again, keeping my eyes averted. Harrison turned and walked out onto the porch. He grabbed the handle of his grandmother's cane, helping Beatrice navigate the small step down toward the driveway. But as he turned his head to speak to her, arrogance overtook his caution. He was so convinced he had outsmarted his clueless, ailing father that he allowed his tongue to slip. "Do not worry," Grandma Harrison muttered, his voice dropping slightly, but not enough to escape my hearing. "The moment he signs it tomorrow, I will initiate the wire transfers. We will have the primary capital moved into the Delaware holding account by Friday morning and the medical directives filed by noon. They will not be able to touch a single dime." He chuckled quietly, a dark, greedy sound that echoed in the damp morning air. I froze. The blood in my veins turned to absolute ice. A Delaware holding account. He had said it out loud. The sheer arrogance of the man had betrayed his entire operation. A local Seattle family trust is designed to keep assets transparent, manageable, and accessible for domestic estate planning. It requires local oversight and is subject to local judicial review. You do not use a Delaware holding account for a local family trust. Delaware is the corporate shield capital of the world. You move assets to a Delaware holding company when you want to completely obscure ownership, shield liquid funds from immediate legal discovery, and rapidly funnel money out of sight through anonymous corporate structures. He was not trying to protect my wealth at all. He was actively planning to instantly steal it from me. The plan was to move the $11 million into a blind corporate entity where neither I nor Maya nor any local judge could track it down. He had just confirmed his timeline. He wanted the medical directives filed by noon on Friday. That was his absolute deadline. Friday was the exact day he fully intended to legally erase my autonomy and seize my entire life. Harrison closed his car door, signaling his departure. The luxury sedan pulled out of my driveway, its red taillights disappearing into the thick Seattle mist. I stood in the doorway for exactly 10 seconds, ensuring their vehicle was out of sight. I grabbed the brass handle of my front door and slammed it shut. I turned the deadbolt, sliding the heavy metal lock into place. The illusion of the frail, broken old man vanished instantly. I straightened my posture, pulling my shoulders back as I took a deep, slow, and steadying breath. Maya stepped forward, her eyes locked onto mine. The war for my life had begun. They had assumed I would simply roll over and surrender my life's work without a fight. They had assumed I was too old, too sick, and too starved for their affection to notice the holes in their elaborate facade. But they had severely misjudged the situation. They did not realize I spent 40 years engineering automated systems, identifying structural weaknesses, and ruthlessly eliminating points of failure. My son had just handed me his entire playbook, complete with his ultimate deadline and his designated financial escape route. The war had not just been declared, it had been mapped out right in front of me. I reached out and rested my hand on the smooth, cold leather of the binder. "We have exactly 4 days," I said, my voice steady and devoid of the artificial weakness I projected moments before. "We have 4 days to tear this entire scheme apart piece by piece." Maya crossed her arms over her chest, a fierce protective intelligence burning brightly in her dark eyes. "Where do we even begin?" she asked, her tone matching my absolute resolve. "We begin by uncovering the truth they are so desperately trying to hide," I replied, picking up the binder and walking toward my private study. People who launch hostile takeovers this aggressively do not do it out of mere greed. They do it out of sheer, unadulterated panic. Something in their perfect upper-class world is completely broken, and they need my $11 million to fix it. And when I find out what that broken thing is, I am going to use it to bury them permanently. I walked over to my desk and sat down in the heavy leather chair. Maya followed, taking a seat opposite me. The adrenaline that had flooded my system during the confrontation was beginning to recede, leaving behind a sharp, analytical focus. I am an engineer. My entire career was built on the ability to observe anomalies, to look at a malfunctioning system, and identify the microscopic flaws that caused the failure. My family had just presented themselves as a flawlessly functioning unit of wealth and benevolence. But their system was littered with critical errors. Maya leaned forward, resting her elbows on the polished wood of my desk. Her intuition was always sharper than mine when it came to human behavior. "Did you get a close look at your mother when she was standing on the porch?" Maya asked quietly. "I saw enough to know she looked terrible," I replied. "She aged a decade in the last few years, but she was trying to hide it behind that tweed coat and her usual haughty demeanor. It was not just how she looked," Maya said, her eyes narrowing as she recalled the interaction. "It was how she smelled. Beatrice has worn Chanel No. 5 every single day since 1982. She used to bathe in it. But when she stepped forward to insult me, the Chanel was just a cover-up. Beneath it, her coat smelled like stale cigarette smoke and cheap, damp carpet. It smelled like a roadside motel, Richard. A woman who is supposedly living in a luxury assisted living facility in Atlanta does not smell like a transient who just spent the night in a budget inn off the interstate." I leaned back in my chair, letting Maya's observations sink in. The puzzle pieces were beginning to align in my mind. Beatrice had always been ruthlessly obsessed with appearances. She would rather die than be seen in public looking anything less than immaculate. If she was wearing a coat that smelled of a cheap motel, it was because she had absolutely no other choice. She was not staying at the Four Seasons downtown. She was hiding somewhere far less glamorous. "And Harrison," I murmured, piecing together my own visual data from the physical struggle at the front door. Harrison was trying to project the image of a wildly successful real estate developer, but his facade was completely cracking under the pressure. "What did you see?" Maya asked, watching me intently. When he shoved his foot into the doorframe, he had to stretch his arm forward. I explained, visualizing the exact moment the threat had escalated. His jacket sleeve pulled back. He was wearing a gold Patek Philippe watch. A timepiece like that retails for over $50,000. It is the ultimate status symbol for men in his supposed tax bracket. But as he pushed his weight against the wood, I could hear the watch. It was ticking. Maya frowned, not entirely understanding the mechanical significance. Ticking. "Luxury mechanical watches do not tick," I told her, the certainty solidifying in my chest. "They have a continuous sweeping second hand. They are completely silent. A loud mechanical tick means the watch runs on a cheap quartz battery. It was a counterfeit, Maya. A very good visual replica, but an absolute fake. And that was not all. When his arm stretched out, I saw the cuffs of his dress shirt. They were heavily frayed. The threads were unraveling. A man who claims to be wealthy enough to manage an $11 million trust does not wear a frayed shirt with a fake watch." Maya sat back, exhaling a long, slow breath. "They are completely broke," she said, stating the fact with a chilling calmness. "This is not a preemptive strike to secure an inheritance for the future. This is a rescue mission for their present." "Exactly," I said, tapping my pen against the desk. "But bankruptcy alone does not explain the sheer unhinged urgency of what just happened. If they were just broke, they would try to manipulate me slowly. They would spend weeks warming me up, taking me to dinner, playing the long game. But Harrison showed up at dawn and demanded my signature immediately. He explicitly said he needed the medical directives filed by noon on Friday. He gave me a deadline of exactly 96 hours. He has a gun to his head," Maya deduced, her brilliant mind connecting the structural dots. "Not a literal gun, perhaps, but a financial one. Someone is forcing his hand. You do not demand an immediate hostile transfer of wealth to a blind Delaware holding account unless you need to pay someone off yesterday. He is not trying to secure your legacy, Richard. He is trying to save his own skin." The realization settled over the room like a heavy, suffocating blanket. My own son was in so much trouble, so deep into some catastrophic financial failure that he was willing to commit elder abuse, forge medical documents, and completely strip me of my human rights just to steal my money and bail himself out. He was willing to throw me into a psychiatric ward and cast my wife out onto the street to save himself from whatever monsters were currently knocking at his door. I looked at the thick, leather-bound binder sitting harmlessly on my desk. It was no longer just a document of betrayal. It was a glaring map of their vulnerability. They had come to my house thinking I was the weak, bleeding prey. They did not realize that their aggressive desperation had exposed their own bleeding wounds. "We need to know exactly who he owes," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "We need to know where Beatrice is actually living, what happened to Harrison's real estate firm, and why Victoria is suddenly so eager to play the loving daughter from the passenger seat of a budget rental car. We cannot just wait for Friday to arrive. We have to go on the offensive." Maya reached across the desk and placed her hand over mine. Her skin was warm, a sharp contrast to the freezing anger circulating through my body. "How do you want to handle this?" she asked. "Do we call the police right now?" I shook my head. "No. If we call the police now, it is just an old man complaining about a pushy family. It is a domestic dispute. Harrison will just claim he was offering financial advice and I misunderstood him. We do not have concrete proof of a crime yet. We only have their intentions and their lies. If we want to stop them permanently, we have to let them step right into the center of the trap they built for me. We have to let them think they are winning." I pulled my phone toward me and unlocked the screen. I needed to call Jonathan Reed. Jonathan was the corporate attorney who had guided my company through the initial public offering. He was brilliant, ruthless, and possessed a moral compass that pointed strictly toward victory for his clients. He had access to forensic accountants and private investigators who could dig up the buried secrets of anyone on Earth. I dialed his personal number. It rang twice before he answered. "Richard," Jonathan said, his voice brisk and professional. "I was just reviewing the final post-IPO filings. What can I do for you on a Sunday morning?" "Jonathan," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly even. "I need to hire your best private investigator. I need a comprehensive, extremely discreet background check run immediately." "Who is the target?" Jonathan asked. "My son Harrison Vales," I said, "and my mother Beatrice Vales. I need to know every single financial transaction, every debt, every legal judgment, and every hidden liability attached to their names over the last 5 years. I need to know what they are hiding, and I need the answers before Friday morning." Jonathan did not ask any unnecessary questions. He was a man who understood that sudden wealth brought sudden enemies. "Consider it done," he said. "I will have a preliminary dossier on your desk by tomorrow evening. Are you in physical danger, Richard?" "Not physical," I answered, looking at the fraudulent family trust document. "But they are trying to declare me legally incompetent to seize the IPO funds. They are planning to use a corrupt medical directive." I heard the sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Understood. I am putting a legal block on all your medical records right now. No one accesses your files without my explicit authorization. We will crush this, Richard." I thanked him and ended the call. The pieces were in motion. The tactical retreat was over. I was now actively dismantling the very foundation of their lives. They had thrown me away 9 years ago because of their ugly, hateful prejudice. They had decided I was entirely disposable. Now they were going to learn that the man they threw away was the only thing standing between them and total destruction. And I had absolutely no intention of saving them. I carried the binder into my study, setting it down heavily on the massive oak desk. I switched on the brass lamp, casting a sharp circle of light across the leather cover. Maya followed me in, quietly closing the door behind her. She moved to the side of the desk, her presence steady, offering a silent strength I desperately needed. I reached for the reading glasses resting by my pen holder and slipped them on. I bypassed the standard introductory pages, knowing full well the real poison was always buried deep in the labyrinth of legal jargon. I opened the binder and began to read, scanning the dense blocks of text with the meticulous eye of a seasoned engineer. The initial clauses seemed innocuous enough, standard boilerplate language establishing a supposedly protective trust structure. I flipped through the pages rapidly, the paper whispering loudly in the quiet room. Maya stood still, watching me dissect the document. The silence stretched out as I navigated the dense legal maze, searching for the anomaly, the hidden trap. I stopped at page 47. The text here was dense, the font slightly smaller, practically daring me to skip over it. I reached for the magnifying glass I kept in the top drawer and held it over the page. Clause 8, Section B. My eyes scanned the microscopic lines decoding the legal speak. I read it once and then again, the words settling like lead in my stomach. Immediate and irrevocable transfer of full medical and financial power of attorney to Harrison Vales upon any formal diagnosis of cognitive decline signed by a licensed medical professional. I stared at the words, the reality of their betrayal crashing over me anew. This was not an asset management agreement. It was a legal death warrant. The cold, hard truth stared back at me from the page. If I signed this document, I was handing my estranged son a loaded weapon. All he needed was a single corrupt doctor to declare me confused, perhaps attributing it to the stress of my recent surgery, and he would instantly gain absolute dictatorial control over my entire life. My health, my freedom, my $11 million, all of it, would fall under his complete authority. They were not planning to wait for me to pass away naturally. They were planning to legally erase my existence while I was still drawing breath. The betrayal cut so deep it felt physical, a cold knife scraping against my ribs. But the sadness, the lingering pain of a father discarded by his own flesh and blood was rapidly burning away. It was being incinerated and replaced by a ferocious, brilliant rage. I had exactly 4 days until Friday. 4 days to uncover the absolute rot hiding beneath their desperate facade. The trap was set, but they had not realized I was the one holding the trigger. So, the very next morning, the gray Seattle sky mirrored the cold, calculated precision that had settled over my mind. Tuesday was scheduled for my routine post-operative cardiology appointment at City General Hospital. It had been exactly 3 weeks since the surgeons had threaded a stent into my chest, a physical vulnerability my estranged family was now aggressively attempting to exploit. Maya drove us to the clinic, her hands steady on the steering wheel, her profile reflecting a quiet, fierce determination. We did not speak much during the drive. The heavy silence was filled with the unspoken weight of the legal death warrant sitting locked inside my desk drawer at home. The hospital corridors were painted in a sterile clinical white, smelling faintly of antiseptic and bleached linen. It was a place designed for healing, but today it felt like the staging ground for a battlefield. My cardiologist, a sharp and meticulous woman named Dr. Aris, ran me through a battery of tests. The electrocardiogram confirmed that the stent was holding perfectly, and the blood flow to my heart was strong. She noted that my blood pressure was slightly elevated, an expected metric given the fact that my own flesh and blood was actively plotting to strip away my human rights. I simply told her I was dealing with some minor post-surgical stress. She signed off on my chart, advised me to rest, and told me to pick up a physical copy of my post-operative discharge summary from the records department on the second floor. Maya and I took the elevator down, stepping out into a quiet, carpeted corridor lined with administrative offices. The records department was located at the end of the hall, tucked behind a set of heavy glass double doors. As we approached the reception area, a sharp, grating voice cut through the low hum of the hospital lobby. It was a voice I had not heard in 9 years, but its entitled, abrasive cadence was instantly recognizable. I reached out, placing my hand flat against Maya's chest, instantly stopping her in her tracks. We stepped back, sliding into the shadowy alcove of a cracked, heavy wooden door belonging to an empty consultation room. Standing at the primary records desk, aggressively leaning over the laminate counter, was Monica, Harrison's wife. She was wearing a tailored beige trench coat carrying a designer handbag that I now knew was likely purchased on a maxed-out credit card. She was violently gesturing with her manicured hands, her voice rising in a pitch deliberately designed to intimidate the young hospital clerk sitting behind the glass partition. "I need the complete medical file for Richard Vales." Monica demanded, her tone dripping with manufactured authority. "I am his daughter-in-law, and I am his primary caregiver. He had a stent procedure here 3 weeks ago, and I need his complete surgical notes, his medication list, and specifically any cognitive evaluations the surgical team performed during his recovery." I stood frozen in the shadows, my heart hammering a dangerous rhythm against my healing chest. My daughter-in-law, a woman who had not spoken a single word to me in nearly a decade, was standing in a hospital lobby boldly claiming to be my primary caregiver. She was actively attempting to bypass the strict federal privacy laws of the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. "I am very sorry, ma'am," the young hospital clerk replied, his voice remaining impressively steady despite her aggressive posturing. "I cannot release any patient records without a signed authorization form directly from Mr. Vales or a legally verified medical power of attorney. Those are strict hospital protocols." Monica scoffed, slamming the palm of her hand flat against the counter. A loud, sharp smack echoed down the hallway. "You are not listening to me," she hissed, leaning closer to the glass. "My father-in-law is not in his right mind. The surgery took a massive toll on him. He is experiencing severe memory loss, aggressive cognitive decline, and violent outbursts at home. He does not even know what day of the week it is. We are in the middle of an emergency medical transition, and I need those files right now so our private psychiatrist can evaluate his baseline before we admit him to a specialized facility." The sheer, unadulterated evil of her lie hit me like a physical blow. The air in my lungs turned to ice. Maya gripped my arm, her fingernails digging through the fabric of my jacket, silently transferring her strength to me. They were not just waiting for me to sign the fraudulent family trust on Friday. They were not sitting idly by. They were actively, aggressively building a fraudulent medical history right now behind my back to justify an emergency psychiatric hold. They were planting the seeds of my insanity in the minds of medical professionals. "Ma'am," the clerk repeated, his tone hardening slightly. "I sympathize with your family situation, but without a court order or a signed medical power of attorney, giving you those files is a federal crime. I cannot help you." Monica's face contorted into an ugly mask of pure, desperate rage. "This is absolutely ridiculous," she spat, her voice trembling with the pressure of their failing financial reality. "We have an emergency psychiatric evaluation scheduled for this Friday afternoon. The doctor needs his surgical history to confirm the anesthesia triggered his dementia. If you do not hand over those records, you are endangering a severely vulnerable senior citizen, and I will personally ensure our lawyers hold this hospital entirely liable for medical negligence." The timeline crystallized in my mind with terrifying clarity. Friday afternoon. That was the exact moment the trap was designed to snap shut on my neck. Harrison had told me he would come by on Friday to collect the signed family trust. At the exact same time, Monica had a corrupt psychiatrist waiting in the wings, ready to use my forged medical history to declare me legally incompetent. They were going to walk into my house, take the signed document, giving Harrison control of my $11 million, and instantly hand me over to a doctor who would lock me in a psychiatric ward before the sun went down. "I will have my husband's attorney subpoena these records by tomorrow morning," Monica threatened, snatching her designer bag from the counter. "You are making a massive mistake." She spun around on her expensive heels and stormed down the opposite end of the corridor, her beige coat swishing angrily as she marched toward the stairwell. Maya and I remained hidden in the dark alcove long after the sound of Monica's footsteps had faded into the ambient noise of the hospital. The scent of sterile alcohol wipes suddenly felt suffocating. I had spent 40 years building automated systems, isolating variables, and predicting failure points. But nothing in my career could have prepared me for the sickening realization that my own flesh and blood had engineered such a flawless, multi-layered conspiracy to destroy my life. "We cannot just play defense anymore," Maya whispered, her voice tight with a fierce, protective fury. They are not just trying to steal your money, Richard. They are actively trying to erase you. They are trying to lock you away in a dark room until you die. I looked down at my hands. They were perfectly steady. The initial shock, the lingering paternal grief, it was all completely gone. It had been entirely consumed by a cold, calculating, and ruthless determination. They wanted to play a game of legal and medical warfare. They wanted to weaponize my age and my health against me. But they had made one fatal, catastrophic error. They had underestimated the man they were trying to bury. Let her try to get the subpoena, I said, my voice resonating with a dark, hollow finality. Jonathan Reed has already locked down my medical files behind a wall of corporate litigation that her cheap, desperate lawyers will never be able to penetrate. We have the timeline now. We know exactly what is going to happen on Friday afternoon. We have 72 hours to dismantle their entire lives. I stepped out of the shadows, taking Maya's hand in mine. We walked toward the records desk, where I calmly presented my identification to the clerk, collected my discharge summary, and walked out of the hospital. The sun had finally broken through the dense Seattle clouds, casting a harsh, blinding light across the pavement. I was no longer a victim waiting for the slaughter. I was the architect of their impending destruction, and I was going to ensure that when the dust settled, they would have absolutely nothing left. The drive back from City General Hospital was enveloped in a heavy contemplative silence. Maya navigated the slick, rain-washed streets of Seattle with a steady hand, her focus entirely on the road ahead. I stared out the passenger window, watching the blur of gray buildings and wet pavement slip by. My mind was no longer clouded by the residual grief of a father betrayed by his only son. That vulnerability had been surgically removed, cauterized by the sheer, unapologetic evil I had just witnessed in the hospital corridor. I was an engineer returning to his workshop, fully prepared to dismantle a catastrophic system failure. When we finally pulled into our driveway, the house felt different. It was no longer just a peaceful sanctuary for our retirement. It was the command center for a war they had foolishly initiated. I walked through the front door, slipping off my damp coat, and headed straight for my private study. The heavy leather-bound binder containing the fraudulent Family Protection Trust was still sitting exactly where I had left it on my desk. It was no longer a weapon pointed at my chest. It was a piece of vital evidence, a crucial prop in the theater production I was about to stage. Maya stood in the doorway of the study, watching me with a look of intense, quiet support. She crossed her arms over her chest, leaning slightly against the wooden doorframe. "What is the first move, Richard?" she asked, her voice calm and remarkably steady. I sat down in my heavy leather chair and placed my hands flat against the polished mahogany surface of the desk. "The first move is to give them exactly what they want," I replied. "Or rather, we have to give them the flawless illusion of exactly what they want. If Harrison thinks I am sharp, angry, or suspicious, he will panic. He will accelerate his timeline. He will call that corrupt psychiatrist tonight and have a judge issue an emergency guardianship order by tomorrow morning. We cannot fight a legal battle on their accelerated terms. We have to slow them down. We have to make them feel so incredibly secure, so utterly arrogant in their victory, that they completely lower their guard." I reached out and pulled my cell phone toward me. I stared at the blank screen for a long moment, calculating the precise vocal frequencies and breathing patterns I would need to deploy. I had to convince a man who had known me his entire life that my mind was rapidly deteriorating. I had to play the part of a broken, confused, and deeply exhausted old man. I took a deep breath, consciously loosening the posture of my shoulders. I let my spine curve forward, slumping into the leather chair. I adjusted my breathing, making my inhalations shallower and slightly irregular. I relaxed my jaw, allowing a subtle tremor to enter my hands. I was engineering a human system failure. I tapped the screen and dialed Harrison's number. I placed the phone on the desk and activated the speaker function so Maya could hear every single word. The phone rang once, twice. On the third ring, the line clicked open. "Hello," Harrison answered. His tone was sharp, clipped, and laced with a highly guarded tension. He was clearly on edge, likely waiting for me to yell to argue or to threaten him with my own lawyers. I waited 3 full seconds before speaking. I let a shaky, ragged exhale drag across the microphone. "Harrison," I murmured, keeping my voice incredibly soft, slightly raspy, and deliberately unfocused. "Harrison, is that you, son?" The silence on the other end of the line was instantaneous and profound. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head as he processed the sheer fragility of my voice. When he finally spoke, the sharp tension was entirely gone, instantly replaced by that smooth, sickeningly sweet mask of fabricated concern. "Dad," Harrison said, his voice dropping into a soothing, patronizing whisper. "Yes, Dad, it is me. I am right here. Are you all right? You sound terribly out of breath." I closed my eyes, forcing a slight pathetic whine into my vocal cords. "I do not know, son," I stammered deliberately, slurring the edges of my words just a fraction of a millimeter. "I was trying to read that big binder you left for me, the trust document, but the words, they just keep swimming around on the page. I cannot seem to make them stay still. My head is pounding terribly." "Oh, Dad." Harrison cooed, layering his voice with a thick coating of fake sympathy. "You should not be straining yourself like that. I told you the legal jargon is incredibly dense. It is too much for you to handle right now. You are still recovering from major heart surgery. The anesthesia takes a massive toll on the body and the mind." I let out another ragged sigh, leaning closer to the microphone. "I have been so forgetful lately, son," I said, playing my trump card. "My mind is just so foggy. I walked into the kitchen this morning and I completely forgot what I went in there for. Maya tries to help, but she does not understand these complicated financial things either. We are just 2 old people, Harrison. It is all just so overwhelming." I looked up at Maya. Her expression remained completely stoic, but I could see the fierce protective fire burning brightly in her dark eyes. "You are doing the right thing by calling me Dad," Harrison replied, and I knew with absolute certainty that he was currently smiling. I could hear the barely concealed triumph vibrating beneath his soothing words. He had taken the bait, hook, line, and sinker. He genuinely believed that the surgical trauma had finally broken my cognitive defenses. He believed his brutal predatory plan was working flawlessly. "Do not worry about reading all those heavy pages, Dad. As I explained yesterday, it is just a standard procedure to protect your assets and your health." "You are right," I whispered, injecting a tone of utter defeated surrender into my voice. "You are right. I cannot manage this $11 million. It is too much responsibility. The stress is going to cause another heart attack. I want you to handle it, Harrison. I want you to take the burden away." The sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line was loud and unmistakable. The sheer greed had momentarily overridden his careful acting. "That is wonderful news," Dad Harrison said, his voice practically vibrating with raw predatory excitement. "That is the smartest decision you could possibly make. We will get everything secured for you. But I am just too exhausted today," I added quickly, maintaining the illusion of severe fatigue. "And tomorrow I have to rest. My chest is aching terribly." "Can you come by on Friday, son? Come by on Friday afternoon. I will have the entire binder signed and ready for you. I just need a few days to sleep." "Friday," Harrison repeated. His mind was rapidly calculating his own sinister deadlines. "Friday afternoon is absolutely perfect, Dad. I will come to the house around 6 o'clock. We can have a nice quiet dinner, and I will collect the paperwork. You just rest until then. Do not worry about another single thing." "Thank you, Harrison," I mumbled weakly. "You are a good son. I will see you on Friday." I reached out and tapped the red button on the screen, disconnecting the call. The very instant the line went dead, the frail, pathetic illusion of the broken old man vanished from the room. I straightened my spine, sitting tall and rigid in my leather chair. My breathing deepened, returning to a slow, powerful, and perfectly controlled rhythm. The fog was gone. The confusion was a ghost. I was cold, sharp, and entirely focused. Maya walked around the desk and placed her hands firmly on my shoulders. "He bought it," she stated, her voice returning to its normal, confident volume. "He bought every single word of it. He did. I confirmed, staring at the blank screen of my cell phone. He is so blinded by his own desperate greed and his fundamental underestimation of me that he did not even question the sudden surrender. He thinks he has completely won. He thinks he just has to wait out the clock until Friday evening to collect his $11 million prize. But he had unknowingly accepted my terms. By agreeing to Friday, he had locked himself into a highly specific timeline. He believed he was giving a dying old man a few days to rest before seizing his fortune and locking him in a psychiatric ward. In reality, he had just given an angry, highly resourceful engineer exactly 96 hours of uninterrupted, unsupervised operational time. 96 hours to follow the hidden money trail. 96 hours to uncover the truth about his failing real estate development firm. 96 hours to discover exactly who he owed money to and precisely why he was terrified enough to forge a bridge loan against my company's initial public offering. I picked up my pen and pulled a fresh legal pad toward the center of the desk. The trap was perfectly set. The countdown had officially begun. I was going to use every single minute of those 96 hours to build a case so devastating, so completely legally and financially ruinous, that by the time Friday night arrived, my family would not just be walking away empty-handed. They would be walking directly into a prison of their own making. The rain had finally stopped by Monday morning, leaving the Seattle skyline looking sharp and unforgiving against the pale gray clouds. I did not sleep that night. I sat in my study mapping out every possible legal and financial maneuver my son might attempt. Maya brought me coffee before dawn, her silent presence fueling my determination. At exactly 8 in the morning, we drove to downtown Seattle. We parked beneath a towering glass skyscraper that housed the law offices of Jonathan Reed. His office was on the 42nd floor, a massive expanse of dark mahogany leather and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked down on the entire financial district. When Maya and I walked into his private conference room, Jonathan was already sitting at the long, polished table. He wore a perfectly tailored dark suit, his expression severe and sharply focused. Sitting next to him was a broad-shouldered man in a simple gray blazer. "Richard," Jonathan said, standing up to shake my hand. "Maya, it is a pleasure to see you again. Please have a seat. This is Arthur Vance. He spent 20 years in the Federal Bureau of Investigation, specifically handling complex financial crimes and racketeering. He is the best private investigator on the West Coast, and he has been working continuously since you called me yesterday morning." He opened a thick folder and slid a stack of banking printouts across the mahogany table. "Mr. Vales," Arthur began, his voice gravelly and deeply methodical. "I understand you need answers quickly, so I will get straight to the point. Your son has been living a complete lie for the better part of a decade. But the real problem started exactly 6 months ago." I leaned forward, my eyes scanning the heavily redacted financial documents. "What happened 6 months ago?" I asked. "The real estate firm belonging to your son Arthur," explained, tapping a rigid finger against a bankruptcy filing. "It collapsed catastrophically. When the supply chain issues hit and the construction timelines extended, his primary investors pulled out. He was left holding a massively empty bag, and the banks instantly froze every single one of his legitimate accounts." "So he is bankrupt," Maya said, analyzing the spreadsheets with her sharp academic focus. Arthur nodded slowly, his expression darkening. "Bankruptcy is the least of his problems, Mrs. Vales. When the legitimate banks cut him off, he turned to the shadow market. He borrowed money from an underground syndicate that operates out of the Pacific Northwest." The air in the conference room seemed to grow instantly colder. Jonathan folded his hands together, his face grim. "An underground syndicate." I repeated, processing the magnitude of the phrase. "You mean loan sharks? Organized criminals?" Arthur slid a clear, high-definition photograph across the table. It showed Harrison standing in a dimly lit parking garage. He looked terrified. Standing across from him were 2 large, imposing men wearing dark clothing. "How much does he owe them?" I asked. bracing myself for the absolute worst. $4 million, Arthur stated plainly, the number hanging in the room like an execution order. He took a $2 million bridge loan 6 months ago, and the predatory interest rates have already doubled the principal. They have completely drained whatever hidden reserves he had left, and now they are actively hunting him. Arthur pointed to a second photograph. It showed Harrison walking into a grocery store. There was a dark purple bruise blooming across his right cheekbone, and he was walking with a pronounced limp. They physically assaulted him 3 weeks ago, Arthur explained. Our sources indicate they gave him an absolute non-negotiable deadline. They told him that if he did not produce the $4 million by this coming weekend, they were going to start taking pieces of him instead. That is why he is operating with such frantic, unhinged urgency. That is why he showed up at your door the moment your initial public offering made the news. I stared at the photograph of my son. He was a grown man, but in that image, looking bruised and terrified, he looked like a cornered animal. For a brief, agonizing fraction of a second, the paternal instinct inside me flared. It was the instinct to protect my child, to throw myself between him and the danger. But then I remembered the cold, malicious sneer on his face when he threatened to declare me legally insane. I remembered the way he had physically blocked my door, ready to strip away my human rights, and cast my wife out onto the street. The paternal instinct withered and died, replaced by a wall of absolute ice. He is planning to use my $11 million to pay off his criminal syndicate, I said, tracing the financial pathway in my mind. He wants to funnel it into a blind Delaware holding account, to instantly distribute the funds to violent criminals, leaving me locked in a psychiatric ward with absolutely nothing. Precisely, Jonathan said, his eyes reflecting a ruthless legal calculation. It is a completely desperate, wildly illegal maneuver. If he succeeds, your fortune is gone forever, and you will spend the rest of your life fighting a fraudulent medical diagnosis while trapped in a state-run facility. We cannot just wait for him to arrive on Friday. We need to completely sever his access to your wealth and build a protective legal fortress around you and Maya immediately. I shook my head slowly, looking away from the photographs and locking eyes with my corporate attorney. No, Jonathan. We are not going to build a defensive fortress. If we just protect the money, he will keep coming after us. He will keep sending his corrupt doctors, and he will keep threatening our peace. We are not playing defense anymore. We are going to dismantle him entirely. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. What exactly do you have in mind, Richard? If my son owes $4 million to a violent syndicate, I replied, my voice perfectly steady, then his primary vulnerability is his debt. Arthur, I want you to find out exactly who holds that promissory note. I want names, I want locations, and I want contact information. We are going to dig deeper into the rot of my family. I want to know exactly what Victoria is hiding. I want to know why Beatrice was evicted. I want every single piece of dirt they have been sweeping under the rug. Arthur nodded, gathering the files. Consider it done, Mr. Vales. My team is already hacking into their communication networks and financial histories. We will have the full picture by tomorrow. I stood up, adjusting the cuffs of my jacket. Maya stood beside me, her presence a constant source of unwavering strength. We were walking into a war, but we were holding all the weapons. My son had completely underestimated my intelligence, my resources, and my absolute refusal to be a victim. He had 96 hours left on his timeline, and by the time Friday evening arrived, I was going to use his own desperate greed to crush him into dust. The next 24 hours moved with the cold, mechanical precision of a ticking clock. Maya and I returned to our home, maintaining the illusion of absolute silence and submission. I kept my phone nearby, answering a brief, patronizing text message from Victoria with a simple, frail acknowledgement. I played the part of the exhausted old man, flawlessly conserving my energy for the incoming storm. On Tuesday afternoon, exactly as promised, my cell phone rang. It was Jonathan Reed. He did not waste a single second with pleasantries. He simply told me to come to his office immediately, and that Arthur Vance had finished pulling the financial threads of my family. When Maya and I stepped back into the mahogany-paneled conference room on the 42nd floor, Arthur was already waiting. The long table, which had been relatively clear the day before, was now completely covered in thick, color-coded folders, bank statements, and legal printouts. Arthur stood up, his broad shoulders casting a heavy shadow across the documents. He did not look triumphant. He looked like a man who had just waded through an open sewer. "Take a seat, Mr. Vales," Arthur said, his gravelly voice echoing slightly in the vast room. "I told you yesterday that your son was in deep with an underground syndicate. But Harrison is not the only one drowning. Your entire family is completely, fundamentally bankrupt. They are a pack of starving wolves, and you are the only piece of meat left on the table." I pulled out a chair for Maya and sat down beside her, clasping my hands together. "Show me everything," I demanded. Arthur picked up a thick red folder and slid it toward me. "Let us start with your mother, Beatrice. She presented herself at your door, playing the role of the wealthy, concerned matriarch. She claimed she was living in her luxury assisted living facility in Atlanta, worried about her legacy. That is a complete fabrication. Beatrice was evicted from the Oakmont estate exactly 3 weeks ago." Maya let out a sharp, quiet breath. "Evicted," she repeated, her eyes widening in realization. "That explains the smell of her coat." "Exactly," Arthur nodded, tapping the top document in the red folder. "The Oakmont estate charges $14,000 a month for their premier residency tier. Beatrice stopped paying her bills 8 months ago. The administration gave her multiple extensions because of her historical social standing, but her accounts were completely dry. She maxed out her credit cards, trying to maintain the illusion of wealth, buying expensive clothes and dining at high-end restaurants, while defaulting on her fundamental living expenses. When the facility finally forced her out, she had less than $200 to her name. She has been living in a cheap $40 a night motel off the interstate for the past 3 weeks. She only flew to Seattle because Harrison bought her a budget airline ticket using a predatory payday loan. The image of my mother, a woman who had disowned me because my wife did not fit her racist, elitist standards, sitting destitute in a filthy roadside motel, was almost too massive to process. Her entire life had been constructed around the perception of superiority. She had cast me aside because she believed she was above me. Now she was practically homeless, weaponizing her failing health to steal my money just so she could return to her country club lifestyle. The absolute hypocrisy was staggering. "And Victoria?" I asked, shifting my gaze to the next folder on the table. "My daughter was sitting in that rental car yesterday, crying and telling me she wanted to reconcile." "What is her financial situation?" Arthur exhaled a heavy, cynical sigh and picked up a massive black folder. "Victoria and her husband Preston are in a far more dangerous predicament than your mother. They are not just broke, Mr. Vales. They are currently facing a massive federal indictment." My jaw tightened. A federal indictment for what? Tax evasion, wire fraud, and conspiracy to defraud the United States government. Arthur stated his words, hitting the room like physical blows. "Preston runs a boutique investment firm in Chicago. For the last 4 years, he and Victoria have been funneling their clients' money through a complex series of offshore shell companies to avoid paying millions in federal taxes. They used the stolen tax revenue to fund their lavish lifestyle. The private jets, the designer wardrobes, the expensive private schools for their children. But the Internal Revenue Service caught up to them. Federal agents raided Preston corporate office 2 months ago. I stared at the heavily redacted federal documents spilling out of the black folder. The sheer scale of their criminality was breathtaking. The government has frozen all their legitimate banking accounts and seized their primary residential properties." Arthur continued, his voice dropping into a dark, serious register. "They are looking at a minimum of 10 years in federal prison if they are convicted. Their defense attorneys require a $2 million retainer just to take the case to trial, and they owe the Internal Revenue Service upwards of $5 million in penalties and back taxes. They do not have a single dime to their names. They are currently living in a rented townhouse using prepaid debit cards to buy groceries." The puzzle was now completely, flawlessly assembled. The frantic, unhinged desperation I had witnessed on my front porch suddenly made perfect sense. They were not a family coming together to protect an aging patriarch. They were a syndicate of desperate, failing criminals who had independently ruined their own lives. Harrison owed $4 million to violent loan sharks who were actively threatening to dismember him. Victoria and Preston needed $7 million to avoid spending a decade in a federal penitentiary. Beatrice needed hundreds of thousands to restore her fake aristocratic lifestyle. Collectively, my estranged family needed exactly $11 million to survive. And I had just gone public for exactly $11 million. I leaned back in the heavy leather chair, the absolute silence of the 42nd floor conference room pressing against my eardrums. I looked at Maya. She was staring at the documents, her face a mask of profound, quiet horror. They had treated her like garbage. They had looked at her with pure, unadulterated disgust. And yet behind their designer clothes and their elitist sneers, they were nothing but common thieves, frauds, and failures. "They are a pack of starving wolves," Jonathan said, echoing Arthur's assessment. He poured a glass of water and pushed it toward me. "They saw your initial public offering as a massive piece of meat falling directly from the sky. They coordinated this attack because they literally have no other options left. If they do not get your money by Friday, Harrison will likely be murdered by his creditors. Victoria will be indicted and imprisoned, and Beatrice will die in a squalid motel. They are cornered, Richard, and cornered animals are the most dangerous creatures on earth." I looked down at my hands. They were resting on the polished mahogany table completely still. I did not feel an ounce of pity. I did not feel a single shred of paternal obligation. For 9 years, they had left me for dead. They had broken my heart, insulted my wife, and discarded me like garbage. And now they wanted to steal my life work to pave over their own catastrophic failures. "They want to play a game of survival," I said, my voice resonating with a dark, hollow finality. "They want to use my money to buy their freedom." Jonathan nodded slowly. "That is exactly what they intend to do. The question is, how do you want to proceed? We have the evidence of their financial ruin. We can use this to secure restraining orders. We can block their access to your estate entirely." I shook my head, my eyes locking onto the photographs of my desperate, failing children. "No, Jonathan. If we just block them, they will find another way. They will keep coming. They will hire cheaper, dirtier lawyers. They will ambush Maya when I am not around. I will not live the rest of my life constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering when my own blood is going to strike again." Arthur leaned forward, crossing his arms over his broad chest. "So what is the objective, Mr. Vales?" I looked at the federal indictment papers, the eviction notices, and the photographs of the loan sharks. "I am going to buy their debts," I said, the plan crystallizing in my mind with lethal perfection. "I am an engineer, Arthur. When a system is irreparably broken, you do not just put a bandage on it. You demolish it completely and clear the ground. I want you to locate Harrison underground creditors. And Jonathan, I want you to prepare the necessary legal frameworks. We are not going to wait for Friday. We are going to build a trap so devastating they will never recover." They thought I was a fragile old man waiting to be plundered, but they forgot I built my entire fortune from nothing. I survived the brutal trenches of corporate engineering by recognizing structural weaknesses and exploiting them without an ounce of mercy. My family is a broken structure, held together by lies, vanity, and impending legal destruction. By the time this week is over, I will systematically acquire every single vulnerability they possess. They came to my home seeking absolute control over my life, my freedom, and my hard-earned assets. In return, I will take complete unyielding control over their inevitable downfall. The War Council is now officially concluded, gentlemen. Proceed with the acquisitions." Arthur raised his hand, gesturing for us to pause. He reached into his gray blazer and pulled out a single manila envelope. It was unmarked and sealed with a simple strip of adhesive. Arthur placed it flat on the table, keeping his broad hand firmly planted over the paper. He looked directly into my eyes with genuine caution. "There is one more thing, Mr. Vales," Arthur said, his voice silencing the room. "I saved this document for last because it elevates this situation from a family shakedown into a highly dangerous federal crime. This is the mechanism Harrison is using to trap you." I stared at the envelope, feeling a cold knot of anticipation tighten in my stomach. "Show it to me," I commanded, my voice perfectly steady. Arthur slid the envelope across the wood. I broke the seal and extracted a small stack of stapled papers. The header was entirely blank, devoid of any corporate logo. It was a private contract drafted with brutal legal terminology. I adjusted my reading glasses and began to scan the dense paragraphs. It was a promissory note, a bridge loan. The principal amount was clearly typed in bold ink: $2 million. I read further down the page, tracing the financial mechanisms of the shadow loan. The interest rates were astronomical, structured to guarantee the principal would rapidly double in a matter of months. But it was not the exorbitant interest that made my blood freeze. It was the collateral. Buried in the third paragraph, the contract explicitly stated that the loan was secured against the impending initial public offering of my company. The shadow lenders agreed to float Harrison the cash based entirely on the guarantee that he would have immediate access to my $11 million payout the moment the company went public. My eyes darted to the final page, seeking the authorization signatures. There, sitting starkly on the signature line, was my own name, Richard Vales. I stared at the looping letters. It was a spectacular forgery. The slant of the R, the aggressive cross of the T, it was a mirror image of how I signed my official engineering schematics. Harrison had ruthlessly practiced it, dissecting the exact flow of my handwriting until he could replicate it flawlessly. "He forged my name," I whispered, the reality crashing over me. "He took out a loan from an underground syndicate and used my company as collateral." Maya leaned over my shoulder, her eyes widening. "Richard," she breathed, her voice trembling with shock and outrage. "If he defaults on this loan, these criminals are not going to go after his real estate firm. They are going to come directly after your company. They believe you guaranteed this debt." "That is exactly right," Arthur confirmed, his tone grim. "Harrison did not just borrow money from dangerous people. He actively sold them a stake in your husband's financial future. And here is the truly catastrophic part." Arthur tapped a specific date stamped at the bottom of the page. "We intercepted encrypted messages between Harrison and the syndicate enforcers. They gave him a hard, non-negotiable deadline to repay the initial $2 million plus the accumulated $2 million in predatory interest. He has exactly 7 days to deliver $4 million in liquid cash. If he fails to meet that deadline, they are going to execute the collateral clause. They will move to seize the assets of your company." The magnitude of his betrayal washed over the room. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with a terrifying logic. The urgency on my front porch. The frantic demand for me to sign the fraudulent family protection trust immediately. The elaborate performance by Victoria and Beatrice. It had nothing to do with greed. It was not a calculated plot to secure an inheritance or live a life of endless luxury. It was sheer, unadulterated survival. Harrison had a loaded gun pointed directly at his temple. If he did not funnel my $11 million into his blind Delaware holding account, by Friday the violent syndicate would come to collect their pound of flesh. He was desperately trying to use my body as a human shield. I looked at the forged signature again. My son had sat in my study for years, watching me draft schematics, watching me sign patent applications and corporate checks. He had used those quiet moments to memorize the mechanics of my handwriting, so he could eventually use it to sign my life away. "This completely changes our legal strategy," Jonathan Reed said. "This is no longer just a civil dispute. This is felony wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. Harrison has committed federal crimes. We do not need to wait for him to execute his medical trap on Friday. We can walk this forged contract directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation this afternoon. We can have him arrested before the sun goes down." I kept my eyes locked on the forged signature. The temptation to let Jonathan unleash the federal authorities was powerful. It would be an immediate, swift, and brutal end to the nightmare. Harrison would be dragged out of his luxury rental car in handcuffs. He would spend the rest of his life rotting in a federal penitentiary, exposed as the cowardly fraud he truly was. But as I sat there, a darker realization settled over my mind. If we arrested Harrison today, the syndicate would still possess the forged promissory note. The violent criminals holding that contract would still believe that I was legally bound to surrender my company's assets to cover his colossal failure. They would not care that my son was sitting in a jail cell. They would redirect their threats and their violence directly toward me and Maya. "No," I said softly, looking up from the document. "If we involve federal law enforcement right now, we expose ourselves to the syndicate. We become their primary target." "Richard, you cannot negotiate with these people," Jonathan warned. "They are violent extortionists." "I do not plan on negotiating with them," I replied, my voice devoid of any warmth. "I plan on buying them out. Arthur, you said you have the contact information for the men holding this specific debt." Arthur nodded slowly. "I do, but reaching out to them is incredibly dangerous." "Set up a secure anonymous communication channel," I commanded, standing up. "Tell them a private investor is willing to immediately purchase Harrison's entire $4 million debt portfolio for cash. They get their money today clean and fully liquid. In exchange, I get the original promissory note, the right to collect and total ownership of my son's life. He thought he could sell me to the highest bidder to save himself from his own failures. Now he belongs to me." Jonathan and Arthur stared at me, processing the sheer ruthlessness of the maneuver. I was not just going to stop my family from stealing my wealth. I was going to use my wealth to become their absolute master. I would take control of the very chains they had forged for me, and I would wrap those chains tightly around their own necks. The heavy silence in the conference room was absolute. Jonathan and Arthur stared at me, processing the sheer unyielding gravity of the maneuver I had just authorized. By purchasing the $4 million debt from the underground syndicate, I was not merely protecting my corporate assets. I was effectively stepping into the shoes of the extortionists. I was buying the absolute legal and financial leverage over my own son. But as I sat there, the grim satisfaction of the strategy was suddenly interrupted. Jonathan leaned forward, his hand clasped tightly over the remaining documents on the polished mahogany table. His expression, usually an unreadable mask of corporate detachment, had darkened into something resembling genuine disgust. "Richard," Jonathan began, his voice lowering to a slow and measured cadence. "Buying the syndicate debt eliminates the physical threat to your company, and it neutralizes the immediate financial leverage Harrison holds. But the financial desperation is only one half of the trap your family has built for you. There is a secondary mechanism, a mechanism so profoundly sinister that we almost missed it entirely during the initial forensic accounting sweep." I felt a fresh, icy tension grip my chest. I had assumed the forged promissory note was the absolute bottom of their depravity. "What else is there?" I asked, my voice flat and completely devoid of emotion. Arthur reached into his gray blazer and withdrew a slender blue folder. He placed it carefully on the table and pushed it toward me. "While we were tracking the offshore wire transfers between Victoria Preston and Harrison, we uncovered a series of localized, highly encrypted communications. Harrison has been making steady, incremental cash payments to a man named Dr. Elias Sterling." Arthur paused, letting the name settle in the quiet room. "Dr. Sterling is not a financial advisor. He is a licensed, privately contracted psychiatrist operating a highly exclusive concierge medical practice here in Seattle." Maya shifted in her chair, her posture instantly rigid. "A psychiatrist," she repeated, her sharp mind rapidly connecting the ominous dots. "Why is Harrison paying a private psychiatrist under the table?" Jonathan opened the blue folder, revealing a series of printed text messages and medical credentials. "Dr. Sterling caters specifically to high-net-worth families who require, let us say, extremely aggressive medical interventions," Jonathan explained. "His medical license has been quietly investigated twice by the State Medical Board for highly unethical practices, specifically regarding the involuntary commitment of wealthy elderly patients. He is essentially a mercenary with a prescription pad and a medical stamp of authority. The air in the room grew suddenly thin. The puzzle pieces from the hospital records department slammed into place with terrifying clarity. Monica had been desperately trying to illegally obtain my post-operative surgical notes and cognitive evaluations. She needed my medical history to feed to this corrupt doctor. They are not just going to take the signed family protection trust and walk away, I said, the horrific reality of their Friday timeline unfolding in my mind. The moment I sign that document, Harrison instantly gains absolute medical and financial power of attorney over my life, and he is going to use it immediately. Arthur nodded grimly. We intercepted the final itinerary they laid out with Dr. Sterling. Harrison is scheduled to arrive at your home on Friday evening at 6 o'clock to collect your signature. He expects you to be exhausted, compliant, and vulnerable. The exact moment he has your signature on that dotted line, he is going to send a text message to Dr. Sterling. And then what happens? Maya asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of profound fear and rising fury. Dr. Sterling is scheduled to arrive at your front door exactly 30 minutes later, Arthur stated, pointing to a printed schedule in the blue folder. He will not be coming alone. He has already contracted a private specialized medical transport team, armed orderlies trained in subduing aggressive patients. He will walk into your home, conduct a completely fraudulent 5-minute evaluation, and immediately certify that you are suffering from post-operative cognitive delirium, transitioning into rapid onset advanced dementia. He will declare you an immediate danger to yourself and others. Jonathan leaned in, his voice cutting through the heavy atmosphere. Because Harrison will be holding the freshly signed medical power of attorney, he will have the absolute legal authority to authorize an involuntary psychiatric hold. They will strap you to a gurney, Richard. They will forcibly inject you with a heavy chemical sedative to ensure your compliance, and they will wheel you out of your own home while you are unconscious. The sheer, unadulterated evil of the conspiracy washed over me like a tidal wave of ice. I closed my eyes, visualizing the sequence of events they had so ruthlessly engineered. I saw Harrison standing in my living room, smiling his fake, patronizing smile as I signed the documents. I saw the private ambulance pulling into my quiet driveway. I saw myself trying to fight back, trying to explain to the orderlies that I was perfectly sane, perfectly healthy, and completely aware of the theft occurring around me. But who would believe a desperate, shouting old man? They would look at me with pity. They would look at my surgical scars and my frantic resistance, and they would see exactly what the corrupt doctor wanted them to see. A tragic case of dementia. The more I fought, the more insane I would appear. It was the absolute ultimate loss of human autonomy. They were not just stealing my $11 million. They were stealing my voice, my freedom, and my right to exist as a conscious human being. And what happens to Maya? I asked, opening my eyes and staring directly at Jonathan. What happens to my wife while they are dragging me out the front door? Jonathan's expression softened slightly, a rare display of genuine sympathy. Once they establish your legal incompetence and secure you in a lockdown facility, they will use the power of attorney to completely isolate you. Maya will have no legal standing to visit you, to access your bank accounts, or to remain in the primary residence. They will change the locks on your home by Saturday morning. They will freeze all marital assets, claiming they must be protected for your ongoing medical care. They will throw her out onto the street with absolutely nothing, and they will use your money to fight any legal challenge she attempts to mount. Maya reached beneath the mahogany table and firmly grasped my hand. Her grip was astonishingly strong. She did not shed a single tear. She did not panic. She simply looked at me, her dark eyes burning with a relentless, fiercely protective fire. They had fundamentally miscalculated the unyielding strength of the woman I had married. They thought they could simply sweep her aside like disposable garbage because she did not fit their deeply racist, elitist mold. They had absolutely no idea the catastrophic level of devastation we were about to bring down upon their heads. The trap was now fully loaded and armed. I was ready to end them all completely and without any mercy. The silence in the conference room was suddenly broken by the sharp, metallic click of Arthur unfastening the clasps of a secure leather briefcase resting at his feet. He did not pull out another paper folder this time. Instead, he extracted a sleek, military-grade tablet. He tapped the screen a few times, entering a complex passcode before turning the device around and pushing it slowly across the polished mahogany table toward me. The glow of the screen cast a harsh, pale light over the dark wood. Jonathan remained perfectly still, his eyes fixed on my hands as I reached out to take the tablet. Maya leaned in closer, her shoulder pressing firmly against mine. "What you are looking at," Arthur explained, his voice dropping to a low, almost reluctant register, "is a direct, unedited transcript of a private encrypted group chat. We gained access to their communication network early this morning by mirroring the cloud backups on Victoria's mobile device. They thought their conversations were completely secure, but they were entirely wrong." I looked down at the bright screen. The group chat consisted of 3 active participants: Harrison, Victoria, and Beatrice. I felt a sickening jolt in my stomach before I even read a single message. The title they had chosen for their private family communication thread was displayed in bold letters at the very top of the screen. The Payday. They had not named it after our family, nor had they used a subtle alias. They had literally named their group chat after the financial windfall they were planning to violently extract from my life. It was a staggering display of callous, unadulterated greed. I scrolled down to the most recent messages dated just a few hours after they had left my front porch on Sunday morning. The casual, almost celebratory tone of their conversation was physically nauseating. They were not speaking like a family, forced into a desperate, tragic decision. They were talking like lottery winners planning how to spend their upcoming jackpot. Victoria was the first to speak in the thread. "Did the old man buy it?" she asked, followed by a string of laughing icons. Harrison replied a minute later, "Hook, line, and sinker." The surgery completely wrecked him. He was shaking and out of breath. "He is going to sign everything over to me on Friday evening just to make the headache go away." Beatrice chimed in next. "Do not get sloppy, Harrison. Make sure Dr. Sterling is waiting in his car down the street. The moment the pen leaves the paper, I want that ambulance pulling into the driveway. We cannot give him a single night to change his mind or talk to his lawyers." The sheer calculated malice in my mother's words took my breath away. She was actively orchestrating the exact minute of my capture. I continued scrolling, my eyes burning, as I absorbed the meticulously detailed blueprint of my impending destruction. Maya let out a sharp, quiet gasp as we reached a long paragraph typed by Harrison. He had uploaded a PDF attachment to the group chat. Arthur had extracted the file and displayed it alongside the messages. It was a receipt for a private, non-refundable wire transfer. I tapped the document to enlarge it. The payment was not directed to a luxury high-end rehabilitation center or a peaceful assisted living facility. The money had been wired to a man named Gregory Vance, a facility administrator for a notoriously underfunded state-run psychiatric ward located 3 hours outside of the city limits. It was a place known for severe overcrowding, rampant neglect, and warehousing patients who had been completely forgotten by society. I stared at the receipt, struggling to comprehend the depth of their cruelty. They were not even going to place me somewhere comfortable. Arthur leaned forward, pointing at the receipt on the screen. "Harrison bypassed the standard admission protocols by bribing the intake administrator directly," Arthur stated, his voice laced with professional disgust. "That facility is a miserable cinder block nightmare. It is chronically understaffed and entirely cut off from public scrutiny. They deliberately chose a location where you would have absolutely no access to outside communication, no visitors, and no chance of flagging down a sympathetic nurse. Harrison explicitly requested their secure, high-dependency wing. He paid an extra $10,000 in cash to guarantee you a bed in a locked, windowless corridor designed for violently unmanageable patients. He wants you buried so deep in the system that a judge will never even bother to review your case file." I went back to the text messages, my hands turning cold as I read Victoria's response to the receipt. "Is the facility going to be a problem?" she asked. What if he starts shouting and demanding to see his lawyers when they lock him up? Harrison's reply was instantaneous and chillingly casual. He will not be doing any shouting, Harrison typed. Sterling already wrote the prescriptions. They are going to put him on a massive daily dose of heavy chemical sedatives the second he arrives. He will be a drooling vegetable by Saturday morning. He will not even know his own name, let alone the name of his corporate attorneys. The chemical straitjacket will keep him completely compliant until the transfer of assets clears the holding account. I felt a sudden violent wave of nausea wash over me. My own children were actively plotting to chemically lobotomize me. They wanted to erase my consciousness, to reduce me to an empty shell just to ensure their theft went smoothly. They wanted to steal the $11 million I had earned through 40 years of blood and sweat, and they were willing to destroy my mind to do it. But the horror did not stop with my physical imprisonment. The messages shifted focus, outlining the rapid-fire financial timeline they had constructed for the days following my involuntary commitment. Harrison laid out the ultimate strategy for my company. He was not planning to manage it. He was not planning to let the stock mature or build upon my legacy. He was planning an immediate scorched earth fire sale. Once I have the medical power of attorney, I am dissolving the board of directors. On Monday morning, Harrison wrote, we are liquidating his entire stake in the tech company immediately to private buyers. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding a slow, furious rhythm. Liquidating an $11 million stake in a matter of days meant accepting a massive penalty. He was willing to sell my life's work for pennies on the dollar, perhaps walking away with only $7 or $8 million in clean cash just to get it done fast. It did not matter to him. He just needed the $4 million for his violent syndicate creditors, and Victoria needed her share to pay off the federal government. They were going to burn my company to the ground, take the money, and leave me rotting in a chemically induced coma in a state ward. I placed the tablet onto the mahogany table, looking at Jonathan. My grief was dead. I was completely ready to destroy them, but Arthur did not reach for the tablet to pack it away. He kept his large hand resting flat against the polished mahogany table, his eyes fixed on me with an expression of profound, heavy solemnity. He told me that there was one final section of the intercepted group chat that I needed to see. He warned me that the financial conspiracy did not represent the true bottom of their depravity. There was a secondary objective buried in their communications. I reached out and pulled the military-grade tablet back toward my side of the table. I unlocked the screen and scrolled down to the final exchange of messages time-stamped just before midnight on Sunday. The tone of the conversation in the thread titled "The Payday" had shifted completely. They were no longer discussing the rapid liquidation of my corporate assets or the logistics of the underfunded state psychiatric ward. The frantic, desperate energy regarding the underground syndicate and the federal indictments had momentarily subsided. In its place was something far darker, a cold, festering hatred that had clearly been brewing for 9 long years. The focus of their conversation had turned entirely to my wife. I stared at the glowing screen, my vision blurring slightly, as I read the words my own mother had typed. Beatrice had initiated the new topic, and the language she used to describe Maya was vile beyond comprehension. It was a barrage of disgusting, archaic, and deeply racist slurs. She spoke about my wife not as a brilliant academic or a loving partner, but as an infection that had contaminated their pure aristocratic bloodline. Victoria chimed in, echoing the bigotry with a vicious, mocking cruelty. But the horrific insults were merely the prelude to their ultimate twisted goal. Harrison laid out the final phase of their master plan in a long, meticulously detailed paragraph. He explained the secondary legal power granted by the fraudulent medical directive. Once the corrupt psychiatrist certified that I was suffering from rapid onset advanced dementia, Harrison was not just going to seize my corporate shares. He was going to petition the state court to legally annul my 9-year marriage to Maya. I read the legal mechanics of his strategy in absolute suffocating horror. Harrison planned to use the fabricated medical history to argue that my cognitive decline had actually begun a decade ago. He intended to present false testimonies claiming that I was not of sound mind when I married Maya. By leveraging his absolute power of attorney and the sworn affidavit of Dr. Sterling Harrison, would file to have the marriage completely invalidated. The implications of an annulment were financially and personally catastrophic. If the marriage was legally erased, Maya would be instantly stripped of all marital assets. She would have no right to our shared home, no claim to our joint bank accounts, and no legal standing to fight for me in court. They were planning to freeze her out completely. Harrison detailed how he would have private security forcefully remove her from our property by the end of the weekend. He promised his grandmother that Maya would be left with absolutely nothing, entirely destitute and publicly humiliated. Beatrice responded to this horrific blueprint with a single chilling message. She typed that the outsider was finally going to be put exactly where she belonged, and that the stain on our family legacy would be washed away permanently. I sat frozen in the heavy leather chair, the glow of the tablet reflecting in my eyes. The puzzle was now complete in all its hideous, twisted dimensions. The financial survival was certainly the catalyst for their sudden return. But destroying Maya was not a financial necessity. It was their ultimate twisted reward. It was a calculated racist vengeance for the choice I had made 9 years ago. They had never forgiven me for choosing love over their bigotry, and they were using this hostile takeover to exact a profoundly personal revenge. I felt a subtle shift beside me. Maya leaned over my shoulder, her eyes tracking the vile messages illuminating the screen. I instinctively tried to tilt the tablet away, wanting to shield her from the disgusting, hateful slurs my family had used against her. But Maya gently placed her hand over mine, stopping the movement. She stood perfectly still, reading every single word of their racist conspiracy. She did not gasp. She did not cry. The quiet, dignified strength that had drawn me to her a decade ago radiated from her posture. She simply absorbed the hatred with the calm, unwavering resilience of a woman who had faced down prejudice her entire life. But as I felt the warmth of her hand against mine, a terrifying, absolute coldness began to spread through my own chest. The lingering ghost of my paternal instinct evaporated instantly. It was incinerated by the sheer, unadulterated evil of their racism. My heart turned to solid ice. They were not just desperate criminals, they were monsters, and monsters did not deserve a single ounce of mercy. I looked up from the tablet, locking eyes with Jonathan Reed. My corporate attorney sat silently across the mahogany table, watching the transformation take hold of me. He knew exactly what had just happened. The man who had walked into his office seeking legal protection was dead. I was now a man preparing for absolute total annihilation. By the debt. I commanded, my voice dropping into a low, deadly register. I want Harrison's $4 million loan purchased from the underground syndicate by tomorrow morning. I want total ownership of his physical and financial survival. Just acquire the promissory note and bring me the original forged document. Jonathan nodded slowly, a dark, understanding resolve settling over his features. It will be done, Richard. And Victoria. I continued, my mind operating with the ruthless, mechanical precision of a wartime general. Find out exactly who the prosecuting attorneys are for her federal indictment. Let them know that an anonymous source is willing to fund a massive legal push to ensure she serves maximum sentences. Arthur Vance closed the thick folders on the table. What about your mother? Arthur asked, his gravelly voice perfectly steady. Find the worst, most underfunded state-run hospice facility in the greater Seattle area, I instructed. Book a bed in her name. If she wants to weaponize her failing health, she can spend her final months exactly where she intended to send me. I stood up from the conference table. The trap my family had built for Friday evening was still perfectly in place, but they had absolutely no idea that I had rewired the explosives. They were going to walk into my home expecting to find a broken, sedated old man and an easily discarded wife. Instead, they were going to walk directly into the fires of hell. There would be no negotiations. There would be no second chances. I was going to strip them of their freedom, their dignity, and their future, and I was going to do it with a smile. Friday evening arrived with a heavy downpour, the Seattle rain washing the streets clean as Maya and I drove downtown. I reserved the primary VIP dining room at the Sovereign, a restaurant renowned for its absolute privacy. The room was a masterpiece of dark velvet heavy mahogany and soundproof glass overlooking Puget Sound. Tonight it would serve as an execution chamber. Maya sat beside me at the head of the long table. She wore a stunning emerald green dress, radiating quiet, undeniable power. I wore my best tailored suit. The frail, exhausted old man they had spoken to on the phone was gone. I was the founder and chief engineer of a multi-million-dollar company, and I was ready to receive my guests. At exactly 6 o'clock, the heavy oak doors swung open. The maitre d' bowed slightly as my estranged family walked in. They moved as a pack vibrating with a sickening, triumphant energy. Harrison led the way wearing a sharply pressed navy suit. Monica walked beside him clutching a designer handbag paid for with a maxed-out credit card. Victoria and her husband Preston followed. Preston looked nervous, his eyes darting around the room, a man burdened by his impending federal tax indictment. Finally, my mother Beatrice entered. She walked with a brisk, arrogant entitlement draped in a heavy fur coat that likely smelled of the cheap motel she had just left, masked with a suffocating amount of expensive perfume. They looked around the opulent room, their eyes gleaming with sheer greed. They thought I was paying for a celebration. They thought this was the final lavish meal before they locked me away. But the most disgusting part of their entrance was how they looked at Maya. As Harrison and Victoria took their seats, they completely ignored my wife. Beatrice let out a soft, dismissive scoff as she sat down directly across from us. She looked at Maya with an expression of pure, unfiltered contempt. It was the look a cruel homeowner gives to a maid about to be fired. They genuinely believed Maya would be thrown out into the rain tonight with absolutely nothing. "Dad, it is so incredibly good to see you," Harrison said, taking the seat to my right. "This is a magnificent choice for dinner, truly fitting for such a momentous occasion. I am glad you decided to do this properly." Victoria reached across the table, offering a fake, sympathetic pout. "How are you feeling, Daddy?" she cooed. "You look a little pale. Are you sure you are up for a heavy meal?" "I am perfectly fine, Victoria," I replied, keeping my volume low to maintain the illusion of fatigue. I wanted us all to be together tonight. I wanted to look all of you in the eyes when we finalized this arrangement. Preston nervously adjusted his collar. "We are just happy to be here, Richard. Family is everything. It is important to protect our legacy." I nodded slowly, keeping my eyes fixed on Preston. "Yes, Preston. Protecting our assets from the federal government is an urgent priority, is it not?" Preston blinked, confusion passing over his face, but Victoria interjected. "Oh, Daddy, do not worry about corporate taxes tonight. Harrison and Preston are here to handle that. Focus on resting your heart." The waiter arrived pouring water, but Harrison waved him away with an arrogant flick of his wrist. "We will order in a few minutes," Harrison said. "We have private family business to conclude first. Ensure we are not disturbed until I call." The waiter nodded and silently exited, closing the soundproof oak doors until they clicked securely into the locked position. We were sealed in. No one could interrupt us. The stage was perfectly set. Harrison reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out the thick binder containing the fraudulent Family Protection Trust. He placed it squarely on the mahogany table and slid it toward me. He then reached into his breast pocket and produced a heavy gold-plated fountain pen. He laid the pen gently on top of the binder, treating it like a sacred artifact. "Everything is ready to go, Dad," Harrison said, his voice dropping into a predatory cadence. "I marked all the signature lines. Once you sign the primary page, the medical directives, and the asset transfer authorizations, I will drive them to the notary tonight. By tomorrow morning, your $11 million portfolio will be secured in the holding account. You will never have to worry about a financial predator again." Beatrice leaned forward, her eyes locked onto the gold pen. "Do the right thing, Richard," she commanded. "Sign the document. Let us put an end to this embarrassing chapter of our family history." She flicked her eyes toward Maya, making it explicitly clear what she meant. I looked at the thick binder. I looked at the gold pen. Then I looked at my son. His eyes were wide, burning with a desperate, starving hunger. He was moments away from paying off his violent syndicate creditors. Victoria was moments away from dodging her federal prison sentence. Beatrice was moments away from moving back into her luxury assisted living facility. They were waiting for the ink to touch the paper. I did not reach for the pen. Instead, my posture completely shifted. The slight slump in my shoulders vanished. I sat up straight, my spine rigid. The frail, exhausted aura I had projected for the last 4 days evaporated into the cool air of the room. I looked at Harrison, my expression hardening into a mask of pure, freezing calculation. Maya reached out. She picked up the gold pen, rolled it between her fingers, and casually tossed it across the room. It clattered against the hardwood floor, rolling away into the shadows. Harrison flinched. "What are you doing?" He snapped, his voice spiking with aggressive panic. He glared at Maya. "Pick that up. This is none of your business." Maya simply smiled at him. A cold, terrifying smile that radiated absolute power. "It is entirely her business, Harrison," I said, my voice echoing in the soundproof room with commanding, lethal authority. "Because my wife and I make all of our financial decisions together." I reached down and picked up my own leather briefcase. I placed it on the table next to his fraudulent binder. I snapped the brass locks open and withdrew a thick gray folder. I pushed it across the table until it stopped in front of my son. Harrison stared at the gray folder. "Dad, what is all this?" he asked, his confident facade slowly cracking. I leaned forward. "I cannot sign your trust document, Harrison." I stated my words, cutting through the silence like a sharpened blade. "I cannot transfer my wealth into your blind Delaware holding account to save you from your catastrophic failures." Harrison swallowed hard, his face suddenly draining of all remaining color. "I do not know what you are talking about," he stammered. "Just sign the paper." I slowly tapped the gray folder. "I cannot sign it, Harrison. I just used my IPO funds to buy your $4 million syndicate debt. I own your life. I own you completely." The silence that fell over the velvet-draped room was so absolute, it felt like the air itself had been sucked out of the space. Harrison stared at me, his jaw completely slack, his eyes widening in an expression of pure, unadulterated terror. The arrogant smirk that had lived on his face for 9 years melted away, replaced by the horrific realization that the ground beneath his feet had just vanished entirely. "What are you talking about?" Harrison whispered, his voice trembling and cracking under the crushing weight of his own panic. "What debt? I do not have any debt." I opened the gray folder, my movements slow, deliberate, and entirely devoid of mercy. I reached inside and pulled out the original promissory note, the very document he had forged with my name. I tossed it onto the polished mahogany table. It slid to a halt right next to the gold fountain pen he had eagerly presented to me minutes earlier. "Do not insult my intelligence." "Harrison," I said, my voice dropping into a cold, lethal register. "I know about the real estate collapse. I know about the underground loan sharks. I know you forged my signature to secure a $2 million bridge loan against my company. And I know they gave you until the end of this weekend to deliver $4 million or they were going to start breaking your bones." Harrison looked down at the forged signature. All the blood drained from his face, leaving him a sickening ashen gray. Monica let out a sharp gasp, covering her mouth with her manicured hand. She stared at her husband, finally understanding the catastrophic reality of their situation. "You belong to me now," I continued, leaning forward and holding his terrified gaze. "I hold the note. I hold the collateral. Your freedom, your future, and your very survival rest entirely in my hands, and I have absolutely no intention of showing you mercy." Before Harrison could even formulate a response, Victoria shifted in her chair, trying to muster a desperate defense. "Daddy, please," she stammered, her voice shaking violently. Harrison made a terrible mistake, but you cannot blame all of us. Preston and I just wanted to help you manage the estate. We had nothing to do with his illegal loans. I turned my gaze to my daughter. She shrank back in her seat, suddenly realizing she was trapped in the exact same execution chamber. I reached back into the gray folder and extracted a thick stack of federal legal documents complete with the imposing seal of the United States government. I tossed them across the table. They landed directly in front of Preston. "Do you want to talk about illegal loans, Victoria?" I asked, my tone dripping with icy contempt. "Or would you rather discuss the $5 million you and Preston owe the Internal Revenue Service? I know about the tax evasion. I know about the wire fraud. I know federal agents raided your boutique investment firm 2 months ago. You are not here to protect my corporate wealth. You are here because your defense attorneys demand a $2 million retainer, and you are terrified of spending the next 10 years in a federal penitentiary." Preston looked at the indictment papers as if they were covered in venom. He began to hyperventilate, his chest heaving as the walls of the soundproof room closed in around him. Victoria burst into genuine tears, a far cry from the theatrical performance she had staged in the rental car. The facade of the wealthy, concerned daughter shattered into a million irreparable pieces. "We were desperate," Richard Preston choked out, wiping beads of sweat from his forehead. "We did not know what else to do." "So you decided to prey on an old man recovering from heart surgery," I stated, my voice echoing with unrelenting judgment. "You decided to lock me in a psychiatric ward so you could steal my life work to pay for your crimes." Beatrice, who had been sitting in stunned silence, finally found her voice. She slammed her hand against the table, her knuckles white with fury. "This is completely absurd," my mother barked desperately, trying to cling to her aristocratic authority. "You are acting like a paranoid lunatic, Richard. I will not sit here and be subjected to these wild, baseless accusations. We came here to save you." I turned to my mother. For the first time in my life, I did not see an imposing matriarch. I saw a bitter, destitute woman sitting in a borrowed fur coat. I reached into the folder one last time and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I slid it across the table toward her. "You came here because you were evicted from the Oakmont estate 3 weeks ago for failing to pay your luxury residential fees," I said, watching her eyes widen in absolute horror. "You came here because your credit cards are maxed out and you have been living in a $40 a night roadside motel. You are bankrupt, mother. You are utterly, entirely destitute." Beatrice stared at the eviction notice, her mouth opening and closing, without producing a single sound. The aristocratic mask she had worn her entire life crumbled, exposing the frightened, hollow reality underneath. "But your financial failures are not why we are having this dinner," I continued, my voice rising, filling the room with a commanding, righteous authority. I could have forgiven the bankruptcy. I could have even understood the desperate, pathetic greed. What I will never forgive is the absolute hatred driving your actions. I pulled out a thick stack of printed transcripts and dropped them in the center of the table. "I have read your private group chat," I declared. "The payday. I know exactly what you intended to do to me. I know about Dr. Sterling. I know about the heavy chemical sedatives. I know about the state-run asylum where you planned to abandon me to die." Harrison let out a choked, panicked sob. "Dad, we were not going to hurt you." "Do not speak," I roared, slamming my hand onto the mahogany wood. "I read every single word, but the most unforgivable part of your conspiracy was not what you planned to do to me. It was what you planned to do to my wife." I gestured toward Maya, who sat beside me, her posture regal, unyielding, and utterly untouched by their hatred. "I read the vile racist slurs you typed about the woman I love," I said, my words dripping with profound, freezing disgust. "I read your plan to legally annul my marriage, to strip Maya of her assets, and to throw her out onto the street with nothing, simply because her existence offended your pathetic, bigoted sensibilities." The entire table sat in paralyzed, suffocating silence. There were no more lies to spin. There were no more excuses to fabricate. They were completely and totally exposed. Suddenly Harrison snapped. The weight of his impending destruction broke whatever fragile sanity he had left. He let out a primal, desperate scream and lunged across the mahogany table, his hands outstretched, grasping wildly for the forged promissory note and the federal transcripts. He knocked over crystal water glasses and silver platters, acting with the frantic violence of a drowning man. Before his fingers could even graze the documents, the heavy oak doors of the room burst open with explosive force. Jonathan Reed strode into the room, his face an emotionless mask of corporate authority. Behind him was Arthur Vance, followed immediately by 4 uniformed Seattle police officers and 2 men wearing dark federal windbreakers. Harrison Vales, one of the federal agents, announced, his voice booming over the chaos of the room. "You are under arrest for felony wire fraud forgery and conspiracy to commit grand larceny." Harrison froze, his arms still stretched across the ruined dinner table. 2 police officers surged forward, grabbing his shoulders and yanking him backward. They slammed him against the velvet wall, securely fastening heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists. He did not fight back. He simply began to weep, loud, broken sobs that echoed pathetically in the lavish room. "Preston Hayes," another officer called out, moving toward Victoria Husband. "There is an active federal warrant for your arrest regarding tax evasion and corporate fraud." Preston instantly surrendered, holding his hands out in defeat as the officers restrained him. Victoria shrieked, jumping out of her chair and clawing desperately at the officers securing her husband. "You cannot do this," she screamed, tears streaming down her ruined face. "Daddy, please make them stop. We are your family." "You stopped being my family 9 years ago," I replied coldly, watching them drag my son and my son-in-law out of the room. "You are just a gang of criminals facing the consequences of your own actions." As the officers cleared the room, leaving only Victoria weeping on the floor and Monica standing paralyzed in shock, I turned my attention to Beatrice. My mother had collapsed back into her heavy chair, clutching her chest, her breathing shallow and ragged. The arrogant matriarch had been completely destroyed. "Richard," Beatrice gasped, looking up at me with terrified, pleading eyes. "Where am I supposed to go? I have nothing." I looked down at the woman who had cast me aside for choosing the love of a brilliant, beautiful black woman. I felt no anger left, only a profound, permanent emptiness. "I took the liberty of managing your living arrangements." "Mother," I said, my voice perfectly calm. "There is a state-run hospice transport van waiting for you outside the service entrance of this restaurant. I secured a bed for you in the exact same underfunded state ward facility you paid to have me locked inside. They are expecting you." Beatrice let out a devastated wail, burying her face in her trembling hands. I turned away from the shattered ruins of my former family. I reached out and offered my hand to Maya. She placed her warm, steady hand in mine, her fingers lacing perfectly with my own. Together we walked out of the dining room, leaving the screaming, the weeping, and the absolute destruction behind us. We stepped out of the restaurant and into the cool, refreshing Seattle night, finally free to live the rest of our lives in absolute peace. True family is never defined by blood alone. It is forged through unwavering respect, mutual protection, and unconditional love. When those sharing your genetics choose greed and prejudice over loyalty, you owe them absolutely nothing. Do not let the illusion of kinship trap you in a cycle of abuse. Protecting your peace, your hard-earned legacy, and the people who genuinely stand by you is not an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate act of self-respect. Sometimes, the most powerful and liberating decision you can make in life is to walk away and let karma collect its debts. Have you ever faced a betrayal from the people who were supposed to love you the most? How did you find the strength to walk away? Share your story in the comments below. Hit the like button to support the channel and subscribe for more powerful, life-changing stories. Now,